Hey, what's going on, Rad fam? I apologize for the vertical video, but this video is going to live on IGTV as well. I was asked by some friends to make a very quick Lightroom mobile tutorial, so I threw something together. I hope it helps you. Let me know in the comments if it does, and without further ado, let's get into it.
So here we are in my iPhone, and what I'm going to do first is I'm going to open up Lightroom CC. So I'm going to click on Lightroom CC, and it's going to open up to, I'll go to All Photos, and in All Photos it gives you the option of importing something from the camera roll here or taking a photo with the camera. You want to make sure that your camera is set to DNG. All right, that is the mobile RAW format that we're using. So make sure it's set to DNG, and it is. And I usually leave everything at auto because if I'm filming or shooting with my phone, I'm not using my DSLR, and so this is probably a quick and dirty shot, and I'm not planning on doing a whole lot of editing. So for the most casual users, you're gonna wanna leave it on auto, all right? So if you wanna edit a photo, let's find one that I took from vacation. So let's get this shot here of the Rad fam in Seaside, and let's go through some of the things I like to do right away. Of course you can do auto if you want. I could press the auto button like this and it will analyze the picture for exposure, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go through it manually. You can already see it looks a lot better just by going from the before to the after. The sky has come out nicely, the foreground is a lot less shadow in it, but I want it to look a tad more dramatic. So I'm going to undo the auto settings just by pressing the little arrow up here, toggling it back and forth like that. So I'm going to go to light first down here at the bottom, and I'm going to go to highlights because I've got a lot of highlights in this image and I like to bring out the sky. So I'm going to turn the highlights all the way down so I get the most of the sky back as possible. And then I'm going to lift up those shadows quite a bit because we were a little bit underexposed when I took the shot. I'm also going to drop the whites just a tad. I don't think they're doing a whole lot, but I'm going to drop them down a little bit there. And then I'm going to drop down the blacks to get a little bit more of that contrast back in the photo. You can add contrast up here, but what contrast really does is it pushes apart your uppermost whites and your lower deepest blacks, so you don't want to add too much. If you want a little bit of the faded shadow look, you can go into curves. You can add some points along your curves line. This is for light, for luminance, and you can drop those highlights just a tad off of white, and you can lift those blacks up to give them a little bit of a fade. Now I've got a little bit of a fade going. I can punch up the middle here, punch up the whites, drop that down a little bit. Don't want to punch up the whites. I'm going to lift the shadows in this section just a tad. And now I've got a little bit of an S curve going, and I've given the photo a more dramatic look than it had before. I'm going to lift those shadows just a touch more since I added some darkness to the photo. And then I'm going to go to color. Now in color I can do a couple things. Since this was a sunset time, I could add a little bit more warmth, but you want to be careful with this. You don't want to go overboard because it can really start to affect the overall image. So I'm adding a little bit of warmth here, and I'm going to go down, and I like to add a little vibrance, but I like to desaturate the photo. So I'm going to take away some of that saturation, but I'm going to add some of that vibrance back for the brightest colors in the image. So that way it's not quite as harsh looking. Another thing I like to do, and it's very kind of popular on Instagram now, is I like to drop the greens because digital greens can be a little overpowering. So I might raise the luminance on the greens, but I might desaturate them overall to kind of take some of the edge off the greens in the photo. You can do the same thing with other colors as well, but green kind of stands out as especially harsh. I don't want to mess with yellow too much here because Rad Mom and Rad Hallie are wearing yellow dresses, and if I mess with yellow too much, it's going to really affect the way the image looks. So I'm gonna leave yellow maybe just a smidge on the orange side, but I'm not gonna mess with the saturation. Orange, I might pump up a little bit towards the reds, but I don't wanna do that too much because it can affect our skin tone. I might raise the luminance a little bit so that we don't appear to be quite so red. And then you can increase or decrease the saturation as you see fit. So I took the saturation down a tiny bit. Red I'll drag over to the orange side, but there's not a lot of red in the image. So you can do that with each of the colors as you want, but notice the colors in your image and don't change them too much because you see my shirt going haywire right here. You don't want to create a problem where one color looks wholly unnatural. I might take the blues a little bit more to the aqua, but not so much that it affects the total image. Now I'll take a quick peek at the before and after. So here's what we've done so far. And that's where we started. So just with those things, I've made quite a difference in the photo. Now I'm gonna go over to effects, and I'm gonna add a little bit of clarity. I like to add a little clarity into the image, sort of affecting the overall sharpness and contrast in the image, but don't go crazy with it because things can start to look real unnatural real quick. This is that HDR look that you see from a lot of rookies who get a hold of Snapseed and just crank up the HDR, and we don't want to do that. So I'm gonna bring that back down into human levels and kind of leave it right about there. Dehaze can bring out a little bit of detail in the sky, but I don't want to go nuts with it because if you have darkness in your image, it'll really start to exaggerate that darkness. So just add a touch of that to keep the sky popping in the background. I'm not going to add a vignette because you'll notice that the sun is in the upper right, and if I add a vignette, it'll start creeping shadows into the corners, and I don't want it to look unnatural with the sun. I'm not going to add grain to this photo either, but you can add grain for kind of an old vintagey look, and you can pump it up here. But because you're fighting grain and noise if you're using digital imagery on a phone anyway, I'm going to drop that down. We don't need it. Oh, another thing you can do is you can go to split tone in effects. Split tone adds a certain color to highlights and a certain color to shadows. So if you wanted to add a little bit more warmth to the highlights here, you could add it in the split toning section. And then I could add a little bit of coolness into the shadows if I wanted to, but you gotta be real gentle with that because it can get kind of crazy. So I just added a tiny touch of orange and teal to it to balance it out a little bit. And I can affect the balance. I can pull it more towards the highlights or more towards the shadows. I'm gonna pull it a little more towards the highlights because I want the sunset vibe to be accentuated. Split toning is a fun way to add a little bit of extra pop to the highlights or to the shadows as you adjust the image. Let's take a quick look. So now, where we started, quite a big difference. All right, now I'm gonna go to detail. Because phone cameras are generally sharp because they don't have a very shallow depth of field, they have a very long depth of field. You can see the background is quite sharp. So I'm gonna drag the masking up so this affects only the sharpest parts of the image, and I'll turn the sharpness up just a tad, but we don't really need it for this photo. It looks pretty good, so we're not gonna mess too much with that. Your optics should be checked. You can click to remove chromatic aberrations. That's gonna reduce some of the color halos around some of the finer details, and I always enable lens correction so that it removes the distortion of the lens. So you can see the effect of that there. It's not huge, but I like to do that. That's the finished image that we came up with from some very simple adjustments. All right, let's look at one more image. I'll show you some other things that you can do with presets if you have them. Okay, so here are the rad girls, Rad Ella on the right, Rad Hallie on the left, flanking the rad cousins, my sister's children. They live in Texas. And so if you want to do some automatic stuff or you want to adjust this image, this is a DNG RAW file from the iPhone 10, and I'm looking at this and it looks pretty good. I've got nice exposure. You know, you got the sun off to the right, it was going down, everything looks nice. So I'm going to go over here to presets, and I'm just going to show you what you can do with presets. If you get into this sort of thing, these are Peter McKinnon's presets, and you can look up his tutorials. He's one of my absolute favorites, and you can see if you scroll through presets, just what each of the presets does naturally to the photo. So Avatar really pumps up the oranges and sharpens it. You can go to Brighten Me Up, raises all of the shadows, Dolomite gives it a nice blue look. Frontier is for more of a really brightly exposed photo, so it doesn't work here. And I just scroll through and I can see what each of the presets does to the photo before selecting the one that I think works best for this image. So presets can be a fun way that you can adjust your photos or have a starting point to kind of play with them. Avatar works really well here, and just by applying that preset like that, you can see it makes a huge difference to the photo. This is the Avatar preset, and this is what it looked like before. So very kind of bluish before, and the Avatar preset adds a lot of that green into the blues and pumps up the reds and the oranges. So a really cool effect. Now, Lightroom does come with its own preset, so I'm just gonna reset all the adjustments here, and we'll go to the Lightroom presets, which are under, if you didn't see, presets, click on user. So I'm not using mine, I'm going to use the Lightroom presets. So let's take a look at the creative tab here. And here are some of the Lightroom presets. So desaturated gives you more of a monochromatic look. I've got cool light, pump up the turquoise and red. That one looks really nice on that particular photo. Soft mist, I think that looks kind of like trash, but it's your opinion, or well, it's my opinion. I don't know what yours is. Vintage gives a little more of that vintage vibe, and then you can kind of go through and see what each of the different presets does. Warm Shadows looks a lot like Peter McKinnon's Avatar. Aged Photo gives it a kind of old school look. I think turquoise and red really looks nice on this particular image. So I can use that as a starting point, and then I can go back through the different settings here and I can tweak it to my liking. You can see that it didn't do a whole lot to the exposure, but it did adjust the color quite drastically. And if you get into the mixes, you can take that a step further. And so you can customize the photo to your liking. See the effect it had on their shirts right there.
Well, there you have it. Let me know if that video helped you, and if there's anything else you're wondering, leave a comment down below or shoot us a message. And if you have any ideas for future tutorials, let me know and I'll think about making them. Take care, have a great day, and we'll catch you in the next one.
Did you just fart? Oh, I can smell it. It's so bad. I'm sorry. Love you. Okay, Ross.
Should we put this in the blue first?
Go, outro.
All right.